No one else could take your place. Come have your way. No one else could take your place. Come flood this place. No one else could take your place. Come have your way. No one else could take your place. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. And now the darkness fades into new beginnings as we lift our eyes to the hope beyond. And our creation waits with an expectation to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one is overcome. Now the silence breaks in the name of Jesus. As the heavens cry, let the earth respond. All creation shouts with a voice of triumph to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one is overcome. He shall reign forever. Strongholds now surrender, for the Lord our God is overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus our defender, for the Lord, and he has overcome. He shall reign forever. Strongholds now surrender, for the Lord our God is overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus our defender, he is Lord, he is overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one is overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every There's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes and wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes and wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes and wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your love and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon in you alone, and I will not be shaken.
All right, hey, good morning, everyone. How are you? You guys grab a seat. Welcome. Thanks for being a part of One Church today. If you don't know me, my name is Brandon. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at One Church, and thanks for making One Church part of your day. If you're online watching us, thanks for making One Church a part of your Sunday at home. If you're on vacation and we're all jealous of you, thanks for making One Church a part of your day. But it's good to see you guys. It's a gorgeous weekend. It's a sunny weekend, one of the few we get, so I hope you're enjoying that. A couple of things as we get started in our service today. One, welcome. If you are newer with us in person or online, I want to welcome you. I hope you enjoy your experience and your time with One Church today. I hope you just kind of learn more about us as we're just this community of people who are trying to work as one to help people follow Jesus. And if you're newer, I'd love to invite you to one of two things. One, if you're in person, I'd love to invite you to something we call 1 in 5 right after the service. And what that is, in the back of the room, there's an orange banner that says information. You'll meet one of our team members there, and they'll give you some more information about the church. It's kind of just a 5-minute overview of who we are as a church, kind of what we're doing. It's a great chance to have any questions that you have answered at that time, and just a no strings attached way to learn more about the church and for us to meet you, because we'd love to meet you. If you're online, our online host is Maureen this week. She's posting an online connect card to the comments section of Facebook or YouTube. Click that link, fill out the information if you're new, name, email, and I'll follow up with you this week with some more information about who we are. And again, just a no strings attached way to kind of learn more about the mission that we're living out together as a church community here in the Chartiers Valley area. Something we do is we worship God by giving back some of the financial resources He gives us, and we invite you to worship that way. And we really do view that as an act of worship, as a way to respond to how God blesses us. And you can give cash or check in the blue box in the back of the room, or go to onechurchpgh.com/giving. That's a safe and secure way you can give online. But that act of worship goes to fuel our work and our missions, to pay for this building, to do our ministries, to do our One Kid stuff, to love on our community. And I just want to share a really cool story. So you guys remember at the end of the school year last year, us and New Life, we fed all the teachers at Chartiers Valley, right? Through Chick-fil-A. And so I got to sit and talk with the owner of that Chick-fil-A this week, and he made the connection of who we were, and we were talking, and he's just it was so awesome that you guys were doing that. What's your heart in doing that? I'm we just wanted to love the community. And he was well, it's weird because we're trying to do the same exact thing, so how can we work together? And so it was just a really cool conversation to say, hey, how can, two organizations in Chartiers Valley love on the community as best we can? And a big reason that it can happen is because of your generosity. So thank you for that. But today, a couple things. We're continuing our Stranger Things series, which is the weird, crazy stories from Judges. We'll get that in a moment. This week's a fun one. I'm really excited about this one. But today, we also have Wesley from CFR, Christian Financial Resources, here, and you see the little pamphlets on your seats. If you are newer, this is new for you, but those who've been around before, you guys know Wesley and you kind of know CFR. CFR is one of our ministry partners. We would not have this building if it wasn't for CFR. They came in clutch to work with us, to give us a loan, to be able to have this space for us that we can use every day of the week as we need it. And they're just a great organization that loves God, loves people, and they're expanding the kingdom in some really cool ways. So he's here to share in a moment, but I want to invite you guys to watch this video really quick before he comes up on stage, and we'll talk a little bit after that. So.
Life is full of choices. As you manage the resources God has entrusted to you, do you know what moves to make? Do you know the next steps for your finances, your family, and the faithful ministries you care about? Can you see more than one move ahead? Like the loving Father that He is, God has given us instruction, training, and teaching so we can learn to be faithful, wise, and strategic. Everything you have is a gift from God. He trusts you to manage it well. At Christian Financial Resources, we believe that God owns everything, and we are to manage everything for God. When you invest your savings and retirement dollars with CFR, you help fund ministry and change lives. Get started today or learn more at cfrministry.org.
Let's welcome Wesley. Everyone say hi, Wesley. There we
One
go.
church. Hey, good to be here.
All right, man. Well, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. I got in yesterday with my wife and I. We were walking around. We kept seeing people with shirts that say "I'm a big deal" on them.
Yeah,
and I was just like, I didn't know what that was about.
Yeah,
So I was like, there needs to be a good church because Pittsburgh people must have a problem with pride. And then I found out there's the Picklesburg.
It's Picklesburg, man.
Yeah.
And maybe some of you, I talked to Eddie earlier, I don't understand the hype of Picklesburg. Maybe one of you do, so inform us after service. We'd love to know what the deal is
Or
with
let me
Pickles.
know if you've had pickle ice cream. Somebody told me that exists.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Someone just said so good. So,
Wow.
so someone's
Wow.
going to inform us afterwards, which is good. So, yeah, Picklesburg. And you finally came on a sunny
Oh,
weekend.
man, it's beautiful.
You've every weekend he comes, it's rainy or over, cloudy, which is people are like, yeah, it's Pittsburgh. So, awesome, man. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Really
Good to be
thankful
here.
for our partnership with you. And so, real quick, I guess CFR does a number of things, but a couple things like what does CFR do to help churches? What's one of their
Yeah. So some of you are already probably familiar with CFR. So we were founded 43 years ago in Florida, simply with a vision of funding church projects. Since that time, we've loaned $1.3 billion to churches to fund church projects all around the country. Now, if you're just like me, because most of this is used for churches to build, buy, or renovate spaces. But if you're like me on a practical level, what that means is that on any given weekend, like this weekend, about 400,000 people are gathered in churches funded by CFR around the country. Tons of people are being baptized. People are coming to know Jesus, to live and love like Jesus. And then they're being sent out into their community to do good work in their community, and they're just making a difference all over the world. And there's all over the country, at least. We're not all over the world. We do work with churches primarily in the States. But one of the churches I'm really excited about, it's a church up in Long Island, church we're working with right now, and they've actually, they're a church plant, but they planted 30 years ago. Oh, wow. They've been set up, tear down the whole time, have never had their own space, which is hard to imagine. And we just funded a loan for them to build their new building there on Long Island. And so I'm excited. Hopefully sometime this fall they'll be breaking ground, and this church will be able to have a space that they can call home, and then they can give their team a rest from setting up every Sunday morning. But that's kind of what CFR does. We fund projects around the country.
That's awesome. We set up and tear down for a few years, and I think we were exhausted from that. So 30.
Yeah, 30 is a long
I couldn't
time.
do that. So that's awesome. And we're one of those churches, like we wouldn't have this building without CFR. In fact, when this whole idea came up to maybe purchase this building, my first thought was, there's no chance we can pull this off. No one's going to give us a loan. We're young. We're still figuring stuff out, but CFR was a huge piece of that. So that's the church side. But when it comes to individuals and family side, how does CFR help that?
Yeah, so some people often wonder, how does CFR work? So the way our ministry works is simple. Everyday people like you and me invest money with CFR. Investors earn an excellent rate of return, but they also get to know their savings is going to fund loans at churches just like this one. And there's a couple of ways that people typically invest. One, I like to say, is for everyone, we believe it's wise that every family have an emergency savings fund, whether you already have that fully funded or you're working on it. We have what we call ready access savings, which you can park your savings in ready access savings. You can link it to a checking account. You can move money back and forth as much as you like. There's zero transaction fees. You're on an excellent rate of return right now, and it's 3%. Which is much higher than the national average for savings. You're on an excellent rate of return, but you also get to know that your savings is going to do ministry at churches just like this one. And another one is certificates for people who might have more that they want to save. Maybe you're saving for a future purchase, or you could even have an old IRA. You can roll that over into a certificate with us. You earn an even higher rate, but also get to know that you're doing some ministry with the money that you have saved. And so that's really a couple of ways. We also have what we call giving funds, and we do charitable gift annuities, those kinds of things. I'm going to be in the back, and I'd love to chat with you more. I can talk to you more about some of the churches we work with, our ministry, and also just ways of getting started investing with us.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, man. Thanks,
Awesome.
Wesley. Sweet. Thanks, man. Yeah, so he has a table in the back. Feel free to go talk with him, share about pickle ice cream, and then learn more about CFR. But yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you and CFR, and I mean, we're a testament to what they do, so really thankful for that. Today, though, we're continuing our Stranger Things series, and to get us started, I want to invite you guys to say hi to somebody around you, but we have a question to ask each week, and here's the question this week. Say hi to someone and share this if you're willing to. What's something you're scared of? Now, not like deep, like dark fear. I'm talking like the phobias, like spiders, snakes, heights. Do you have one of those types of fears? Because I remember when the movie Arachnophobia came out, and any sort of spider that I saw for a long time, I was terrified of. And so go ahead, share that with somebody around you. It's going to make sense in a moment, but say hi. What's maybe a phobia or fear that you have, and then we'll continue. Once the bumper video starts, you guys can grab your seat. All right. So real quick, after my message, we'll take communion. There's prepackaged communion in the back of the room. You can grab that whenever during this message, or if you're at home, grab something, bread, crackers, juice, water, anything that represents the body and blood of Jesus. But we'll do that. But I'm sure everyone has a fear, a phobia of some sort, right? Whether it's the normal things that we hear about, like spiders or snakes or heights or claustrophobia, like the tight spaces. My wife, terrified of tornadoes. The idea of them just freaks her out. Me, one of my bucket list items is to chase a tornado one day. So we're just very different in that sense. Like, the movie Twister was inspirational to me as a child, okay? So I want to live that out. They actually have cars now that anchor to the ground so a tornado will go over the car and you can be inside the tornado. Sounds glorious to me. I'm in. So, but we have different fears, though, that kind of frees us up. And let me tell you a story about one of my best friends in the world. His name is Tiny Tim. No, not the Christmas Carol Tiny Tim, but Tim Gardner, who we went to college together. And Tim, I didn't know him yet at this point. It was our freshman year. And one of the things we loved to do in college was we'd go out to the lake and we'd go cliff jumping. And so that could freak people out because it's heights, jumping off a cliff into water. And I thought it was awesome. And so we would always go. And it was a gorgeous sunny Sunday, kind of like this, where we're going out to the cliffs to go jumping. And there's a huge crowd from Kentucky Christian there that day. And there's just a big group there. And all of a sudden, the men's soccer team shows up. And this Tim is on the soccer team. And I don't know him yet. We're all freshmen. So the first couple weeks we've been at school. And they're trying to get Tim to jump off the cliff. And so Tim's up finally. I'm like, cool. this guy's going to jump. And he goes to jump, and all of a sudden, he just freezes. Like, he, like, death grips the back of the cliff, like he's Spider-Man clinging to it. Like, all of a sudden, he has this, like, super strength where he's not going to go off the cliff. And he stays there. And we're like, dude, like, there's only one route to jump right now. You got to go or leave. But his fear gripped him so much in that moment, he couldn't do either. He couldn't jump off the cliff, and he couldn't pull himself to, like, climb back off of the cliff to get away from the jumping area. He's stuck there. And so I'm not talking, this isn't like a 1-minute ordeal. This became like a 30-minute ordeal where Tiny Tim is so terrified to jump off this cliff, he is ruining everyone's Sunday. And in that moment, I did not like Tim. Now, he's one of my best friends to this day. Like, we get together every year. Like, I love the guy. But in that moment, like, this guy is ruining my fun on this Sunday because his fear is getting in the way of everybody else's fun right now. But he is terrified to do it. And we tried challenging him. Like, we're trying to figure out this guy, like, does he, like, man up if we call him a big baby? And, like, so we start doing that. Like, dude, you got to do this because people are watching you and thinking you're a chump right now. That didn't help him. And then we do the encouraging thing. Okay, we love you, man. Tiny, tiny, tiny. And he's not doing that either. And finally, I'm convinced of this. Like, I think he went to move and he slipped and he fell into the water. And he survived. He's good now. Like, he was okay. And he's like, oh, I can do this now. But his fear changed everything in that moment. He couldn't move forward. He was stuck in that situation. And honestly, as much as he was frustrating me in that moment, I can't honestly fault him. Because I've had fear grip me in different situations in life that prevented me from moving forward, from doing what I'm trying to do in that moment. And we all have a tendency to live in fear sometimes. Like, if you think about our culture right now, it almost encourages it. Like, our culture tells you, you have to be afraid of something or someone. If you watch the news, it's pretty much telling you, this is the thing or the person you should be afraid of right now that's going to ruin your life forever. And so we're just kind of taught to live in this fear. And here's the problem. Here's what fear does. Fear does two things. One, fear makes us think that what we're afraid of is actually bigger than us or bigger than God in our faith situation. And so it just tells us that we can't handle whatever the thing is that we're afraid of. And the second thing that it does is fear stops us from moving forward in life. And so look at Tim's situation, for instance. He thought that jumping off that cliff, it was probably like a 20-foot drop. He thought that was too much in that situation. It was bigger than he could actually handle. And that fear prevented him from moving forward. Moving forward meant either jumping off the cliff or just moving out of the way so other people could. That's what fear does to us. We think it's bigger than us, and we think we can't move forward because of it. And it's that idea that we're digging into today as we continue our Stranger Than Fiction series that we're talking about. And this series has been looking at the book of Judges, and it's looking at the strange stories in the book of Judges. And if you're familiar with the book of Judges, you're probably thinking, wow, you're definitely hitting a weird spot in the Bible, which we are. If you're not familiar with the book of Judges, that's not something you ever dug into, you're going to get through this, especially today, and go, wow, there's some really weird stuff in the Bible. And it is. Like, these stories are strange. They feel like made-up fairy tales. And so we're digging into them so we can understand a couple of things. And here's kind of where we're at to kind of help you understand the timeline of Scripture. Early on, God set up the patriarchs, where it was Abraham, and he had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons, and then those kids had kids, and those kids had kids, and eventually this big group was put into slavery in Egypt, and then Moses rescued them and led them out of Egypt to freedom. And this is known as the patriarchs. That's the timeline of Scripture. 300 years after all of that, though, is the time of the kings. That's King Saul, King David, David and Goliath, if you know those stories, his son Solomon. It's the time of this kingdom of Israel. They had this earthly space that was their kingdom. They had kings in charge of it. That was that. But in between these two timelines was the story and the timeline of the judges. And at that time, there was no king. God wanted to be the king of Israel. He wanted them to be different from the other nations around them because they all had physical, in-person kings, and they were a disaster. He's like, no, I want to be your king. It's going to be different. I'm going to give you this law. And this law that I give you will be different from the rest of the world around you. It's going to show you and the world how you're supposed to live, how I design you to live. And they're supposed to have that. And to help with that, he gave them judges to kind of help them navigate all of that. And this time took about 300 years. So as we're looking at the story of Judges, we're looking at something that's actually longer than the history of America right now. But a lot of stuff took place in this time of Judges. And during this time, this is the cycle they kind of went through. They went through the cycle of disobedience. They would ignore God and his laws. And that disobedience would lead to disaster. And they'd be like, oh no, we need help. And so they'd cry out to God for help. And God would send someone to deliver them out of that mess they put themselves in. And once they got delivered, they would just go right back to disobedience because that's what humans do. And so all through Judges and all throughout a lot of the Old Testament, this is the cycle that we see God's people going through. And honestly, there's not much difference than what we do today. Like, we get ourselves in trouble, we seek out God for help, he shows us the help, and we just go right back into the same cycle. But today we're looking at this series and these stories to see a couple of things, to explore God's nature and human nature, to see how those stories still impact us today, and to see that even today, thousands of years later, human nature is still very much the same, and God's nature is still the same. And so the recap, here's kind of where we've been the past few weeks. Week 1, we talked through a crazy story at the end of Judges, actually. Go rewatch that at your own risk. And then week 2, last week, we talked about Deborah, and how Deborah and Jael and Barak, they were called by God to serve bigger purposes, and how we are all called to serve bigger purposes in our lives. But today we're looking at another story of how God uses another judge, but this one was struggling specifically with fear. And this one, it really is a fun one. And so let me set the scene for you. Israel disobeys again. Okay, remember that whole cycle is going over and over. They were doing really well, but then they just started worshiping other things. They started worshiping this other god named Baal. And that was a made-up god from a surrounding nation. So they were like, that sounds fun. Let's go worship that god and get the blessings that they receive. And this causes God to get frustrated with them, and he allows the Midianites, a local enemy, to take over Israel. And the Midianites they're just brutal to the Israelites. They come in, they use their force against them. They're so strong, they actually forced Israel away from their communities, and they were stuck living in tents on the mountainside. They were forced out of their towns where they were living. And so this is happening, and they start crying out for help again. Again, disobey, disaster, cry out for help, they need to deliver. And this is where they're at in the cycle again. And so God sends a prophet. And this prophet comes and tells them and reminds them that, hey, you forget what God has done for you in the generations before. You keep forgetting who God is and the work that he's done. And this prophet reminds them that they were not supposed to worship other gods. They're supposed to follow the law that God gave them. They were supposed to be different from the rest of the world. And so they're reminded, like, oh yeah, we screwed up. We need help. And so God says, okay, I'm going to deliver you again. I'm going to send help, and this time through a guy named Gideon. And this is the story of how Gideon finds out he's about to play a big role in God's plan. Judges 6, 12 through 16 says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied. But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all of his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did the Lord not bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. And so, this angel shows up to Gideon and says, listen, God's with you. God's going to use you to free Israel from the Midianites. And Gideon kind of goes, okay, hold up. I got some questions. And the questions are becoming, okay, if you're with us, why is all this bad stuff happening? Which almost sounds like a reasonable question. Like, God, if you say you're here with us, why is this happening? He's kind of ignoring the fact that they're in this mess of a situation because of their own doing of worshiping other gods. But God says, okay, you know what? I get it. Go save Israel. I'm going to use you to save Israel. And then comes the excuses. Well, okay, God, I hear you're saying here, but my family, my clan is the weakest in our tribe. And within my family, I'm the weakest of my family. And no one likes to admit that, right? Like, no one likes to, yeah, I'm the weakest in my family. Like, my 3 boys, none of them will admit that they're the weakest. Like, they will figure out how to show the other person they're stronger than them in some way. Like, it's brutal sometimes. They'll just rip on each other and then show them, like, I'm better than you in some way, shape, or form. None of them would ever admit that they're the weakest. That's just not part of our human nature. But Gideon's here like, yeah, I'm the weakest. My family's the weakest. There's way better people that you can go get to save Midian. There's no way I can do it. And honestly, those excuses sound like fear. He understands the Midianites are this power. that are just ravaging and just taking over Israel for a long time at this point. He thinks there's no way he and his strength could ever defeat them. And so that fear is creeping him. And he's thinking it's too big to conquer, and now it's too big to move forward. And God says to him, I will be with you. Now, I want you to remember this, because as we go through the story, God's going to prove that he's with Gideon, just not in the way that we would think he would be with him or how Gideon was hoping God would be with him. And so Gideon hears that, and so what he does is, okay, I hear you, but can you give me some proof? Because that's one of the things we need to get rid of our fear with, right? Like, I'm terrified, so I need proof that this is going to be okay. And so he kind of doesn't have faith here. He's asking God almost testing God, which probably shouldn't do, but he does, and God agrees. And so the angel that God sent to give him this message, he's like, okay, if this is all real, stay here. Here's the thing. I'm going to bring an offering to you. And the angel's like, fine. Go bring your offering. And so Gideon goes and gets an offering and brings it to the angel to present to the angel. And the angel strikes it and lights it all on fire and consumes the whole offering right there. And Gideon's like, whoa. And then he believes, like, okay, let's do this. And so the first step that God is going to use Gideon for is to tear down this altar that they made to Baal. And so Israel's supposed to be worshiping God and God alone, but they make this other altar to this other God that they're worshiping that got them in trouble to begin with. And guess who made the altar? Gideon's dad. And so Gideon's first task and his first job is to go tear down this altar that his dad makes, which is kind of interesting because sometimes when God calls us to do stuff, it may mean we go against family. A little weird sometimes. My dad wasn't a huge believer at all, especially growing up. And I remember he did not like my involvement with the church sometimes. And I was involved with a youth group for a long time. And one of the things my youth pastor was having me do is like, hey, I really want you to dig into Scripture more. So here's what I want you to do. This is before texting or anything like that because I'm old. I had to call him. I called him once a night, like, hey, I read this tonight. And so I went to go call my youth pastor. I'm like, hey, just checking in. He was kind of making me, holding me accountable for this, which was awesome. My dad got really mad that I kept calling him. I'm like, all I'm doing is, telling him I read the Bible. He's like, that sounds like a cult. And so my dad grounded me from calling my youth pastor because he was like, this is so I snuck and called my youth pastor anyway. So sometimes you have to go against family is what I'm saying here. So Gideon has to go against his father. But this is what takes place. Verse 27, he says, Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. So Gideon does it, but he does it during the covering of night because he's fearful. He's fearful of his dad. He's fearful of the townspeople and how they would react. Despite God proving to him that God was with him, he was still afraid of the reaction of other people. And so he goes and they tear down the altar at night. The next morning, the town wakes up and they see this altar torn down and they're angry. And they know it's Gideon. And they go to Gideon's dad and say, hey, bring your son out so we can kill him. That's the result here. And Gideon's dad, he probably sees his own failure here. He actually stands up and protects his son by saying, listen, Gideon tore down the altar. But if Baal is this powerful God that we thought he was, does Baal need us to defend him, or can Baal defend himself? Or can God defend himself too in the midst of all that? Will God prove who he is? Let the gods figure this whole thing out, essentially. And in doing so, he kind of put it back on them like, okay, whoever we're worshiping, let's see who's actually the powerful one here. Let's not worry about Gideon. He's fine. And so he protects Gideon in that situation. But this, in that process, reminds Israel of God's work. And they start realizing, oh yeah, we screwed up here. We started worshiping other gods. We forgot about the one true God and all the work that he's done for us over the years. And so now it's like they're on board of waking up and going, okay, we should go back to God, focus on our worshiping of him, and we need to figure out how to get freed from the Midianites. And so step one's done. The altar's torn down. Now step two, which is to defeat the Midianites. It's time for battle to go against them. And so the Midianites, they gather their forces, and they're strong. They've been controlling Israel for a long time. Gideon blows his trumpet as a sign to get people to rise up and fight. And so Gideon gets his people, but Gideon's still fearful. Even though God just proved it to him again that it's going to be okay, Gideon's fearful. So he goes to God and says, hey, God, I need a sign. And God's like, okay, what is it? He's like, hey, I'm going to put a fleece on the ground, okay? And when I wake up tomorrow, I need you to do this for me. I need you to make the fleece wet with dew and the ground around it dry. Can you do that for me? And God's like, fine. So God does it. Gideon wakes up. The fleece is wet. The ground around it is dry. Now, if you guys wake up one morning, there's dew on the ground. It's never a situation where one thing is wet and everything else is dry, right? Everything is wet. Well, God shows them, hey, I'm with you. The fleece is wet. Ground is dry. You're good. Cool. Gideon's ready to go, right? No. Gideon then goes, hey, one more thing, God. Tomorrow, can you make the fleece dry and the ground wet around it? And then I'll really know that you're with me. And God's like, okay. And he does it again. The next morning he wakes up and the fleece is dry, the ground is wet. Again, God is showing Gideon, stop being so fearful. I'm with you in this. I'm with you. And so Gideon's like, okay, let's go. Now we could criticize this. But come on, how many times have you and I done this? Where like we know God's asking us to do something. We'll go, God, okay, but show me this. Or do this. And we start putting demands on God for him to prove himself, even though he's done it over and over again in our lives. In fact, I saw a pastor say something yesterday where he said, every day is this holy unknown, where God is working. We just don't know where yet. God is talking. We just don't know what he's saying yet. We have to look and we have to listen. And if we actually do that every single day, we'll see how God is working and proving himself every day. But oftentimes God will call us, like, hold up, God, I hear you. I want to do this, but can you prove yourself to me? Even though he does it every day. So he does it here for Gideon. He does it for us. So now it's time to go to battle. And Gideon has 32,000 men ready to fight. That sounds pretty good, right? Like me, who's going to fight me? Well, me and my 32,000 buddies, we're ready for this. And so they're going to battle. And God's like, hold up. That's too many. Way too many, Gideon. And Gideon's like, what? I was hoping you'd double it. Like, give me more. And God's like, no. It's too many. So here's what I want you to say to the troops. Say to all of them, if anyone is afraid, you're free to go. You can just go. There's no shame. We're not going to punish you for this. If you're afraid to go battle the Midianites, you can go home. So a few went. 22,000 of them. 22,000. I mean, the majority of them were like, yeah, I'm terrified. I'm out. So they left. So 32,000 goes to 10,000. Still not bad, but 32,000 would have been a lot better. And God's like, nope, too big. So God's like, hey, as you're going, you're traveling to go to this battle, I want you to stop and get some water. And here's what he says in verse 5 of chapter 7. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as dogs laps from those who kneel down to drink. Okay. Sounds weird, but there's actually a purpose behind this. Those who lap like dogs, essentially they're kind of standing up and they kind of bring water up through their hands and they drink it from their hand, like lapping like a dog. They were the ones that were ready for a surprise attack. Basically, their head was always on a swivel. They were ready to go no matter what took place. And those who got down on their knees to drink from the water, they were not. Their backs were turned from the situation behind them. They weren't prepared. So basically, God says, separate those who lap like dogs, you keep them. They're ready for anything. They're the ones you need. Those who are knelt down, they may not be afraid, but they're kind of dumb. Like, they're not ready to fight. Like, they're not the soldiers you need in this situation. And so they do that, and guess what? Gideon's left with a whopping 300 people. That's it. 32,000 to 300. Gideon's probably thinking, like, what just happened here? I'm ready to battle. God, you've proven yourself to me. I'm ready to do this. And you take my army from 32,000 people to 300. We're going to get squashed by the Midianites. But then God says, no, this one's on God. He actually just came to Gideon and said, I'll prove it to you. Verses 9 and 11, he says this. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterwards, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he went, and Purah, his servant, went down to the outpost of the camp. So they go down. And I like how God tells Gideon, like, hey, you got this. I'm in this with you. But if you're afraid, Gideon, go down to their camp. Kind of be a spy. Go take your servant with you and listen to what takes place. And Gideon goes down because he's what? He's afraid. He's afraid. So they go down to the camp and they hear the people of the Midianites talking like, I had this dream last night. They hear about this dream that this loaf of bread rolls into the camp and destroys it. And basically this visual kind of takes place in Gideon and his servant Parah here, like this dream, like, oh, that bread is us. We're going to destroy this camp. And like Gideon's friend, his servant Parah, is like, listen, we can't lose. We've got this. And Gideon's like, yeah, I think you're right. And so Gideon's again, he's terrified, but he's proven again, God's with him. He's given the Midianites this dream that their camp's going to be destroyed. So here's what they do. God gives them this strategy. Hey, the 300 of you, split them up to 3 groups. So 100, 100, 100. They kind of go surround the camp as best they can. And then at a certain time, that 300 people, all they did was they took their trumpets and they blew their trumpets and they took pots and they smashed them together. They just made a bunch of noise. And the Midianites, who undoubtedly that dream had been going around circulating through camp, like, hey, I had this dream, this loaf of bread was going to roll into our camp and destroy us. And they're thinking, oh my goodness, like I'm gluten-free. This is not good right now. And this rumor starts spreading, and then they hear these trumpets sounding from all around them, and these pots are smashing. They're thinking, these guys are crazy. They're smashing pots against their head. What's taking place up there? And they start freaking out against each other. And the Midianites, you know what they do? They start drawing their swords and start fighting each other. They start turning on each other, and the 300 Israelites up there are just blowing their trumpets, smashing their pots. They ain't doing anything. They're just making a bunch of noise like my kids every single day. And they just are making all that noise, and the Midianites start fighting each other. And then they start running away from their own camp. Think about this. They fight each other, and then they think they're losing against each other, and they run away from camp. And then the Israelites chase them down and kill them all. That's it. They defeat them. Israel pursued them. They were victorious. Gideon was victorious. Despite all of his fear, despite all of his doubts, despite his constant need for proof from God, God was still there through it all. And Gideon was victorious. God resourced and guided Gideon exactly how it was needed. Now here's the thing. The fear that we could criticize Gideon for is no different than the fear that grips us in our own lives. Like fear of things that we think are bigger than us, that we think that's bigger than we can handle. And I want you to think about this. The things that you're really scared about. I'm not talking necessarily about heights and spiders. I'm talking about things that we're really, really terrified of. We think that thing that we're scared of is bigger than us. It's bigger than God. So just recognize that's sin in our lives when we think something's bigger than God. And that fear stops us from moving forward. And we actually deal with these things. And I'm talking about things like life and faith and relationships and impact type moments in our lives. Those are the things we're fearful of. Like fear of following Jesus. Listen, we're all adults, most of us in this room. Some of us are teenagers in this room. Like, there's still this fear of following Jesus that can get in the way. Like, what are other people going to think? What if they criticize me or judge me or whatever that may be? And that fear grips in, and we feel that fear is bigger than us, it's bigger than God, and we don't move forward. Or the fear of doing something to expand God's kingdom. I think about last week as we talked about, Deborah and her story and how God calls us, all of his followers, to do something much bigger than ourselves. Every single follower of Jesus in this room watching online, we have a call to do something bigger than ourselves. But fear can get in the way of that. Or maybe for you, it's a fear of being the spiritual leader in your family. I know this is a tough one sometimes where maybe you have young kids, maybe you have teenage kids, but there's this tension of it's my job as a father or as a mother to lead my family and my children spiritually. Listen, I love One Kids. I love the volunteers that run. I love what they're doing right now. They're learning about Scripture and about God, and they're building relationships with each other, and it's awesome. So if your kids are there, they're having a great time, I guarantee it. But also, we are not the number one spiritual leader for your kids. You're meant to be that. And that can be terrifying. And that fear can stop us from moving forward and being that spiritual leader. Or maybe it's the fear of sharing your faith with your friends, because that's terrifying too, because what if they reject it? What if they make fun of you? What if they think you're weird? Because let's be honest, it is kind of weird. Hey, my life is about this guy who died and rose again, and I committed my entire life to following and trusting him. You should do the same. It's weird, but it's fearful. Or maybe the fear of starting something new. And I know some of you felt that tension where you feel like God's asking you or calling you to do something, and you just know, like, I'm supposed to do this for my community or for my workplace or for my family, but starting something new is terrifying. Or maybe it's the fear of ending something you've needed to end for a long time. A relationship, a job, a habit, something that's getting in the way. But the fear of ending that sits there. And we talked last week how all of us are called to do stuff for God, no exceptions if we're a follower of God, but fear gets in the way of that, and Gideon struggled with that. Yes, he came through in the end. Like, Gideon's a hero in this story. He's the deliverer that God used to free Israel from the Midianites. But his fear got in the way all the time, and it was a problem. His fear almost stopped him multiple times. But God showed up, and God did his God thing and revealed himself. I'm like, yeah, I got you. I'm with you in this. God does the same thing to us. And something we have to remember is this, is God is bigger than your fear. We could probably could stop the sermon right there. We're not. We could stop it right here. I have a couple more things I want to say, but this is the biggest truth I think we need, that God is bigger than whatever you're fearful of. Do you trust that? Listen, we don't believe in a God who needs us to stand up for him. That's my favorite thing about this whole story. You know what I like the most? Is when Gideon's dad says finally, when they tore down the altar, is like, you know what? If Baal is who he says he is, let him stand up for himself. Or God can stand up for himself. And God does, over and over. You and I do not hold God up. God does it on his own. We don't serve a God who needs us to stand up for him. He has the power to overcome all things that stand in our way. And that's the story of Gideon, and it shows that. All the worldly things that Gideon dealt with, they should have stopped him. Like, he had his dad build the altar, and the community wanted them dead. The Midianites were powerful and controlled Israel for a long time, and his army became very, very small. All of this on the surface seems like Gideon has no chance of winning here. But God was the one in control. And God came through over and over, because God is bigger than your fear, and God is with you in the midst of that fear. And so if God is bigger than your fear, how do we know? It's because God is the ultimate resource. This whole story of Gideon, God's like, cool, I'll prove it to you. Here, go tear down the altar. Town's going to want to kill me. That's okay, I got your back on that. Okay, I'm ready to fight now. Can you do the whole, make this wet and this dry thing? Yep, did it twice. Cool, I'm ready to fight with my army. No, the army's too big. Let me break it down smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It's pretty much nothing. But I've got this. And he proves it again. Gideon wanted signs, God did that. Gideon needed protection, God did that. Gideon needed the right people to fight with him, God did that. It wasn't 32,000, it was 300. Gideon needed the right plan, God gave him the plan. Trumpets and smashing pots. That's it. God resourced him with everything he needed. God did not resource Gideon the way Gideon wanted. Let's be honest, like if I'm Gideon, I want the 32,000 people. Right? I want the signs. I prove it to me and then let's go. But God gave him what he needed, not what he wanted. And God does the same for us. He will give you what you need in spite of your fear. And if you're sitting here right now, there's something that you're fearful of. Maybe you can make a commitment to following Jesus. Maybe you're afraid of what your family would say if you did that. Or maybe there's something else in your life you're fearful of. I guarantee you, God is going to give you everything you need to do this. He always does. So I want to ask you this. What are you afraid of? And I want you to really think about this for yourself right now. What are you afraid of? And get really honest with it. What is God calling you to do, asking you to do, laying out in front of you for you to take a step of faith and be a part of? What are you afraid of? And what are you afraid of? Ask yourself this too. What is that stopping you from doing? That's what fear does. It stops us from doing what God's calling us to. Imagine if Gideon, with his fear, what if we let fear ultimately get the best of him? And he doesn't tear down the altar. He doesn't go to battle with 300 people. Things would be a little different. What's that stopping you from? Fear is the biggest obstacle for God working in your life. I know a lot of times we think it's just sin, and sin gets in the way of that without a doubt. But fear is just this barrier that prevents us from trusting God. And fear, we can become this sin. I still remember it was 2018. We were like 6 months old as a church. And we were that young little baby church. For those who were part of it, you know, we were setting up and tearing down at the school. We were trying to figure this out. We didn't even know each other that well yet. People coming in and out, trying to figure out if one church was a place for them to connect. And, you know, when you start a church, like, people don't just, like, show up to your church when you launch. Cool, we'll give money to you. And I remember we got down to this point, 6 months in, I get our email from our bookkeeper, and I look at our finances, and I'm like stopped dead in my tracks. We were at a festival that day, not Picklesburg, different one. And Daniel's like, what? I'm like, if this doesn't change, one church is done in 2 months. And I literally started talking to people about like other jobs I could get. I started thinking like, this thing, I'm a colossal failure because this thing's not even gonna last a year. I was terrified. And then like 3 weeks later, we get this check that comes in from another church. I said, hey, we just wanted to support you. I mean, this wasn't a check, this was a check. So I was like, oh my, God just proved himself. He's here. So I had to make this almost like this conviction with me and God, and I had this conversation with God. I'm like, okay, God, I was terrified for a long time with this thing. Like, we're going to fail. It's not going to work. Okay, I'll make this. I'm trusting you this. I'm not going to worry about money anymore. And it sounds kind of stupid as a lead pastor in charge of a church that you should probably worry about money. I really haven't. And this isn't like a brag, like me bragging moment. This is one of those like, God, if I focus too much on this thing right now, I'm going to live in fear that we're not going to do the right thing and we're not going to make it as a church. So I'm going to trust that you're going to take care of this. And here's what's been amazing. We're over 5 years old now. And every single year, our giving as a church has gone up and up and up. This year, and we don't talk about money a ton here, but I just want to be upfront with like, this year we're trending to not just like be in the black and like have more giving than we lose. We're actually in a spot where if we keep trending and giving the way we are, that we're going to be in the black at the end of this year. And it's going to allow us to do more things for our community that we've dreamed about. More things to launch different types of ministries for our church and our community. Stuff we've prayed about for a long time. A big piece of that is your generosity. So this is what happens when we start doing things together. And maybe for you, that was one of the fears you had. Like, I don't know if I can give to the church because money's tight at home. I get that. I've lived it. When we step out in faith and we see God continue to show up, then we can see over and over that God's going to do what he's meant to do. Let's keep doing that. Let's not let fear get in the way. Because here's what happens. If we stop letting fear control you, watch what God does through you. That's the one thing we're walking with today. And that's the story of Gideon. That's the story of, it should be a story of you and me. The things that we're fearful of, if we stop letting fear control us, watch and see what God does through us. Because this is the story of one church. This is the story of people moving here. The people who said, you know what, it's kind of crazy for me to change jobs, move multiple states away, but I'm going to move and be a part of this thing called One Church. It's the story of us. It's the story of you guys who came and joined a new church meeting at the school around here. Like, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. He keeps sending me postcards. We're going to show up and be there. And you start being a part of it. It's people who were part of One Church who gave their lives to Jesus who said, you know what, I'm never going to give my life to Jesus. It's the people who serve and lead boldly through One Church. Not with fear, but with trust. This is the story of who we are. And here's the deal. We're better for it, and our community is better for it. Our families are better for it, and the kingdom of God is advancing here in a little corner of Pittsburgh because we're not living out fear, we're living out faith. So let's continue to be that church. So I'm going to invite you guys to stand, and we're going to take communion together. Because again, if there's ever like a, hey, God needs you to prove it to me, just look at the cross. God, there's no way I can earn my way to you. Yep, there is no way we can earn our way to you. So he made a way for us through Jesus. God, there's no way I'm good enough. Yeah, we're not good enough, but he made it so that we are righteous because of Jesus. Hey, God, there's no way I feel like I can't trust you to get me through this crazy situation. We can look at the cross and say, look, that's the craziest situation this world has ever seen. My son laid down his life and rose again. That's what we're reminded of at the cross. So I invite you guys to take communion with me together. We take the bread that represents the body that was broken for us, so we can live out faith and not fear together as one. And together we drink the juice that represents the blood that was shed for us, that shows forgiveness and grace for us. That we don't have a spirit of fear, we have a spirit of faith and trusting in God and everything he calls us to do. And we remind ourselves of that by drinking this together as one. You pray with me. God, thank you for today and for who you are and what you continue to do. God, you prove yourself every single day. Help us to see that. God, you talk to us every single day. Help us to hear that. And so, God, help us to then live out faith and not have fear get in the way of it. And God, if there's people in this room or watching online right now, there's fear getting in the way of us trusting you, God, remove that fear. Help us to trust you. God, if there's ministries you want someone to start, God, remove that fear and give them the faith to trust you that you're going to resource them with everything they need. And God, thank you for resourcing One Church with everything we need. For partners like CFR, for churches, for community members, for people who said One Church is our church family, our spiritual family together. God, thank you for resourcing us that way. Now help us to trust you and live out faithfully all the stuff you're calling us to do. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
All throughout my history, your faithfulness has walked beside me. The winter storms made way for spring, and every season from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises and fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises and fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. All right, thanks, One Church. It's been fun worshiping with you. We'll see you next week.